Coming up time to start the meeting. We're just missing councillors Freeman and Tilbury. You have a councillor Tilbury. Just one to go. I think we can get started anyway. I have my script from Ellie, which I'll read out first. I am Councillor Gardner, the chair of the Audit and Accounts Committee, and I would like to welcome everyone to the meeting, which is being held virtually and in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings, which reflect the recently published government regulations. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will also be available to view after the meeting is finished. Councillors who sit on this committee are identified by name on the screen, and I will introduce the officers by name before they address the committee. Councillors are reminded that although this meeting is being held remotely, they are regarded as being present in a meeting of the council, and they should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the Member Code of Conduct and not allow members of their household to distract them during the course of the meeting. Can members ensure that their mobile phones are now switched off or on silent? Members of the committee will turn on their video link during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they have been invited to speak by myself as the chair. Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they will be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote taken on the item under discussion. Members can indicate their wish to speak by raising their hand and can only speak when I, as chair, invite them to do so. The officers present will also only switch their video link on during the item that they are presenting or where they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. As chair, I will confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time in the agenda who will address the committee by audio link. Councillors should declare that they are leaving the meeting and switch off their video link if they have a disclosable pecuniary interest or other personal interest in an item on the agenda. The councillors can switch on their video link when I call the next agenda item. Voting will be taken by roll call, and I will confirm the recommendation proposed to the committee before the voting begins. Can each member indicate whether they are for or against the recommendation or whether they wish to abstain? Hopefully we'll not have any IT problems, but can I remind councillors that if their connection is lost, they should immediately advise Democratic Support Officer and use their meeting link to access the meeting again. And we now have a full house. Welcome, Councillor Freeman. Apologies for absence and substitutions. There are none. Any declarations of interest? None indicated. Any urgent matters, Ellie? Ellie's gone quiet. Oh, there we go.
No, there's not.
Thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of June. Has anybody got any comment? Or can we accept those together with I can find it. Ellie has given us the agenda item 5, which would be the working from home is all very well. Recommendations tracker, which I think is now pretty well clear. Okay, we can move on to agenda item 6. I will invite Maria Grindley from Ernst & Young to address the committee.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I did have a query. I had my hand up and I had the electronic hand up.
My apologies, Emily.
Don't worry. On the tracker, I'm not sure we received the second action which was the reference to percentage of the portfolio in arrears and rental holidays and queries that we raised all in all about the overall health of a large part of our commercial real estate portfolio.
Must admit, I thought we had. Ellie, can you comment on that?
Hi, I was in the process of speaking to property today because I couldn't track it down, so I wasn't sure whether we have received it or not. It might have not come through me, but I'm not sure.
Okay, can we leave that one open and you can come back to us after the meeting? Thank you, Anneli. In which case we can go over to Maria Grindley from Ernst & Young. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. So thank you, members. What I'd like to do in a moment is ask Larissa, who's the audit manager, to take you through some of the key aspects of the report. We'll clearly take that you've read the report, but there are some aspects of it that it's important that we take you through. There are still aspects of the audit that are outstanding, and what we're looking to do is to try and pull those items together in the coming few weeks with the hope of being able to sign. Our aim is the end of October for that. And that will clearly depend on whether we get the last bits of information through and obviously the time to just turn those around and audit them. And again, I'll ask Larissa to just make it clear to the committee what is actually outstanding at this point. And then the final point I just wanted to raise was, clearly, as a committee, you've asked us to report on anything that we find that's over £50,000. I just need to emphasise to the committee that does not mean that we've reduced our materiality or tested to that level. So we're not giving you any assurance to the level of £50,000. We are only giving assurance per our report to the materiality level set in our report. It's just that if we happen to have seen something that is smaller, we would obviously raise that per your request. It may be that in our sampling, we've seen things that are smaller that we don't know whether they're right or wrong, but because they're below materiality, we have not done the additional work to test them because we only test to our testing levels of materiality. So I need to set that point out really clearly for you before you receive the audit results report.
Maria, all we asked for was if you found anything that you had noted, report it to us.
No, I understand that, but I understand that, but because of the minute that talks about materiality and the 50,000, I had to make that absolutely clear. Because of my report, I have to make it really clear to the members of the committee as those charged with governance what we're testing to. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to say by way of introduction to the report. But Larissa, did you want to take members through the key aspects that we need to raise for their attention, please?
Yes, sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to walk you through the key aspects of our initial audit results report. And I'm going to start on page 25 of the reporting pack, just to walk you through the executive summary. Just giving you a second to get to that page. So just to emphasize some updates in our scope compared to the audit plan that we submitted, that was included in the reporting pack presented at the audit committee on the 29th of June. So these are changes with respect to that plan. Our changes in materiality only have to do with the final accounts being available to us subsequent to the audit plan, and they are consistent. The methodology is consistent with the audit plan. We did take into account COVID on our materiality assessment, and we did not find it necessary to update the approach. Another change is the adoption of IFRS 16 was deferred until 21-22. So that's no longer an area. That was no longer an area of audit focus for us. Some changes to highlight with regards to the impact of COVID-19. We have a new area of focus around disclosures with regards to COVID-19 impact on going concern and events after the balance sheet date. And with respect to risk assessment, we had to consider the impact of COVID-19 on the valuation of PP, property, plant and equipment, and investment property as a result of the practice alert from the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors issued on the 19th of March on potential material evaluation uncertainty. Moving on, in terms of how COVID-19 impacted other ways in which COVID impacted our audit process, obviously working remotely and increased risk on internet information produced by the entity as we're not able to review original documentation. We used compensating procedures such as sharing functionality in Microsoft Teams and additional testing of information produced by the entity and by tracing to original documentation. Overall, the changes resulted in an increased level of work. On the next page, just to highlight the status of audit, further on, I will discuss in more detail. It is in progress, and amendments to this results report might arise and will arise. In terms of audit differences, we report audit differences identified and corrected above £1.4 million, and we don't have anything in this report because at the date that we prepared it, we did not finalize the audit of the difference of 4.6 million, which relates to valuation of investment property under construction. At this state, we have agreed the difference with management, and it will be recorded in the accounts, which will result in an increase of value of investment property under construction. And the reason behind that is the timing difference between the specialist valuation work and the reporting date. In terms of value for money, our work is in progress, and we are not at the stage of concluding. And in terms of controls, our audit was fully substantive, and we did not identify control issues that we need to report to you. Next, I'm going to jump to another page. I'm going to take you to page 58 of the reporting pack, and that's where you can see more details on the status of our work. We listed the main areas which are still under review, and there have been a few updates from the date that this report was prepared. We received more information from management, which is under our review. If you have any questions on this, we can take them.
A question from Onali Cubit.
Yes, thank you. You talked about the outstanding matters, but obviously on page 58, it implies that the PPE has been completed, and you're saying it hasn't been completed.
Yeah, so I mentioned one audit difference that was identified from the work that has been performed up to date. However, our valuation specialists are still working on a sample of items, and that work has not been completed.
So the statement here that it will be virtually complete by 28th is not, it hasn't been completed.
It has not.
Okay, I'm just I don't know whether I can ask a question with regards to the accounts then, because in the accounts we've reduced the value of our land and our plants, but we've increased the value of our commercial real estate investments. Have you been involved in that, or is that something separate then? Because the overall net worth of the council has gone down despite the overall valuations of the commercial real estate portfolio has gone up, and the difference in the reduction seems to be because the value of land and property and equipment's gone down.
If I may, Chairman, that would be a question for your finance team. From our perspective, we're currently auditing to get our assurance on the values in PPE and IP. But from the point of view of the figures that have gone into the statements, that would be a question for your finance team.
Honourable, if you can hold that question to the next paper.
Sorry, thank you very much. But just out of interest, how involved are you then when you do this audit in how the council arrives at those figures?
We have to remain totally independent. So the council produces their accounts, and as external auditors, we have to be independent of that process in order for us to be able to audit and then give you assurance to all the stakeholders and the public that the accounts have been properly prepared. So we are not able to help you in the preparation of the accounts, otherwise it would fetter our independence.
No, I fully appreciate that. I'm very grateful to you for that. What I mean is that there is an overlap, isn't there? Because you're opining on, in the audit, the value of the property, plant and equipment and investment properties. And I'm asking a question about the property, plant, equipment and investment properties.
Yes, but from the point of view, I'm happy to answer a question from the point of view of the audit work we've done. And as I said, that work is currently underway, and our EY Real Estate's team are looking at a sample of properties in order to give us assurance around the valuations. They'll be looking at the nature of those properties and the range in which they think the valuations would be reasonable. That work's not yet completed, but more than happy to obviously answer questions on that once that work is completed.
Okay, brilliant. And then, Mr. Chairman, would you indulge me? Can I just ask one more question?
Go ahead.
So in relation to that, and following on from the meeting that we had last time round, there was, for example, an investment property where we have had a current valuation that has basically resulted in the investment, that's in the investment portfolio, being reduced in value by 1.8 million. In terms of your audit role, how many investments like that in an investment portfolio with reductions in value of that level then trigger a comment from you?
So we would, again, we test by sample. So we would look at anything that is significant and also take a sample of items. So we would comment on items that we had sampled if we felt that they were reduced or increased by an amount that wasn't commensurate with the nature of the item. And again, we would comment on anything that was so significant that obviously it stood out to us and we felt we had to test and review it. So they're the instances really where we would review and comment.
Henri, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I just pushing it a little bit further. What's the financial trigger of a loss that would result in you being compared with the property cost investment versus the property valuation today? What would be a trigger for you to be involved?
Our triggers would be based on a number of things. So we would sample based on our materiality and our testing levels set out in the report. We also have certain triggers that would make us look at specific aspects of PPE and IP. So, for example, if there'd been a change in valuation method, a change in valuer, something that just looked unusual, different, they're the sorts of triggers we would look at. So it's not that there's a particular value that we would say, okay, if there's a loss of this amount, we will look at it. But ultimately what we do is we sample valuations based on our materiality and we test on that basis.
Okay, Larissa, I think you can continue. Who have we lost?
Sorry, with regards to tender bids, I thought with local government there was an obligation for there to be at least 3 bids with regards to any contract that we have out to tender. Is that a requirement on, as per Ernst & Young and the auditor?
When we don't look at whether you've your tendering processes in detail, unless again we have something that would trigger that. Tender processes would be governed by whichever rules you were following. So based on the level of the contract, you have all sorts of rules that kick in. So you have EU procurement rules, you have other rules that would kick in based on the financials instructions that you have as an organization, your standing financial instructions and your standing orders. So that's not something that we would comment on, but again, that's a question for your finance team from the point of view of what they do in relation to tenders and how many tenders they get.
Would you mind if I asked you under local authority rules whether there is a minimum of 3 bids required?
Again, it would depend on the nature of each of the tender itself. And again, I think that's a question you should ask your finance team based on the specific tender.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor James, I spotted you leaving the meeting, but feel free to comment further, should you so wish. Are we going back to Larissa?
That was the end of the report. So it was the end of what I intended to present. That's why I open to questions.
Okay, one question from me. At this stage of the audit, are you happy for the committee to pass the accounts and leave it as a delegated authority, or would you prefer us to come back and look at the report when it's finalised?
That really is a judgment for the committee, I'm afraid, Chairman. I can't advise you on what to do there. You are well within your rights to make that decision to delegate authority if you feel that would be the more efficient way to do things. But I am not able to advise you because that is a decision you need to make as a committee, I'm afraid. I'm sorry to caveat that, but I have to be so careful on my independence.
Okay, let me rephrase the question. Given the level of outstanding work, would it be sensible from your point of view to accept that the committee have not reviewed the final account?
Again, it's where we're at the moment, Chairman, is we have work outstanding on property, plant and equipment and investment property. Should the committee decide to delegate authority, we will clearly follow your wishes on that, and we will update you should anything arise that's substantial or material from now till signing off the accounts. If the committee determines that they would like to come back and look again at the report, then again, that's a matter for you. But I'm more than happy either way. It's totally up to you which way you determine.
Okay, can I get some views from the committee? Councillor Harvey. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I think, given the report we've had this evening, if the matter came back on the agenda at the next meeting with an update of any material changes to the report that's in front of us now, so at least we know what has changed, we know what's happened, it should be a proper update, and let's bring it to the next meeting. Let's not leave it to anybody's delegated responsibility. Let's own this as the committee. That would be my view, even if that meant changing the date of the next meeting.
In scheduled for December, which is beyond the cut-off date. However, officers have indicated they could bring that meeting forward so that we could wrap up the accounts before the end of November.
So be it. I think it would be appropriate to bring it back. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor James?
Absolutely agree with what Councillor Harvey's just said. I don't think as a committee we can possibly sign off something that's incomplete and put our name to it as a committee. It seems that the accounts are deferred from full council to audit, which makes sense because you've still got the wisdom of all the groups and all the parties around a table without sort of trying to have a debate amongst 60 people. However, to then boil that down to one person, and although I have absolute faith in you, Councillor Gardner, you are a Conservative, we have a Conservative administration, and the idea that we are offering an audit function when you have one Conservative marking the homework of the Conservatives is a great concern. And I'm sure there is nothing wrong, and I'm sure if there was, Ernst & Young would be jumping up and down because they've got a professional responsibility and obviously reputation to uphold. So I'm sure this will all be fine, but we leave ourselves open to question marks if we, as opposition members, we are failing in our duty if we don't offer proper scrutiny of the accounts. So therefore it has to come back, probably for us to have a very short meeting in which we say, oh, it was all fine in the end, but we have to do that because, and I appreciate it's the administration's council, but as opposition, we do have a very important responsibility to scrutinise it, and I'm not prepared to sacrifice that responsibility.
Councillor Vogt.
Thank you, Chair. I would say it's got nothing to do with party politics. I think that page 58 does not provide me with a real sense of the materiality of what's remaining. And I think that was probably at the basis of your question, Chair, to Ernst & Young representatives. And as we can't get a real feel for the materiality of it, I think we are beholden to meet again to look at them when they're complete.
So as I understand it, we've got two possibilities which are acceptable. One is we have a special meeting as soon as the accounts are finalised, or we take the December meeting, pull it forward into November and wrap everything up at that final meeting. But we'll carry on debating paper 6 and the accounts themselves tonight. Is everybody in agreement with that? Sounds like that's what we're going to be doing.
Councillor Gardner, sorry to interrupt. Councillor Kim Taylor has indicated that she'd like to speak.
Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I was really merely just going to say that I agree with what Councillor Vaux was saying, in that we do have an incomplete piece of work, both from audit and in accounts, and therefore it would make sense to come back. And I think there's more security for everybody if we do that as a committee rather than just delegate that to one person. I'm guessing that is the decision we have to make it, or it's appropriate to make that decision in respect when we're looking at agenda item 7, because I think that's where it belongs, is it, for on the actual accounts? Presumably we could still discuss the accounts on agenda item 7 and then just pick up the things that materially changed.
I think that was
in another meeting.
That's what I was suggesting.
Yeah,
Councillor Taylor. Yeah, it is very much my feeling that this is the route we should be taking. So thank you to Maria and Larissa for all the work they've done so far, and I wish them luck with all the work they've still got to do to complete, but we'll see them again at the next meeting. Just check with Sue whether she thinks a one-off meeting is going to be better, or whether we can do everything as a November meeting and bring December forward.
Thank you, Chair. Because our auditors are aiming to have everything signed off by the end of October, if we could have a special meeting, that would be great, but obviously appreciating that members are extremely busy and having to fit another meeting in, only purely because that then gives us sufficient time rather than right at the end of November to get the paper, to get the actual accounts published and all the appropriate documentation onto the internet. So we could bring forward the December meeting, and I don't think there's too much on the work programme that would cause an issue for. But obviously it would be fantastic from our point of view as a council if we could get them signed off earlier rather than right at the deadline. But I'm happy to take whatever the chair of the committee wants to do.
Doesn't quite answer my question. Ellie, can you find us some dates?
Yes, I'll have a look at some dates and I'll get them circulated.
The sound wasn't terribly good there, Ellie, but
Oh, sorry.
I missed. Thank you.
I can have a look and I'll confirm.
Okay, so I think we go for an earlier meeting should the accounts be prepared, and Ellie will sort out a date for that. Should they be running late, we'll do everything at a November meeting. Okay, leave it with Ellie to sort that one for us. So we can move on to agenda item 7, which are the accounts themselves. And no doubt Sue is going to talk us through them.
Well, you'd think that, wouldn't you? No. So obviously I'm introducing the report, but Suzanne Jones, our interim head of finance, will take you through the papers with the assistance of Sarah Finch. So obviously, as already noted this evening, one of the recommendations, clearly you will update and obviously note on this agenda item. So this is the accounts as they stand within the papers. There are some highlighted sections which Suzanne and Sarah will take you through in terms of the changes that we have agreed to date with the auditor. As it stands at the moment, we're not materially expecting to make any further changes other than the current investment property that Larissa has already referred to. And therefore, I'm happy to go through the accounts with you and answer any questions. And as agreed on the previous item, clearly, if there are any further changes, we'll bring that back to a future meeting. So if I can, I will hand over to Suzanne.
Thank you. Suzanne Jones is now going to speak to us.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Sue. Good evening, everybody. Just by way of introduction, the statement of accounts were prepared and published in draft from the end of June, which met the deadline. And as far as I'm aware, there have been no questions raised by any member of the public. You've already heard from the external auditors on the work that's been done thus far and what remains to be concluded before they're able to issue their opinion on the accounts. Page 72 sets out 3 changes that have been made since publication of the accounts. And that covers 2 of which were found by ourselves, 1 of which was drawn to our attention by the auditors. We think we will be making a further change with regard to the one property at Basingview on the I think it's the Loddon House site. Forgive me if I don't get it all quite right. My knowledge of all the sites is not as good as it might be, having only been here a short period of time, but Sarah can answer any questions on that. There are recommendations in the report with regard to either approving the accounts to delegate to the chair in conjunction with your executive director of resources. However, having heard the previous conversation, I think someone will need to move a recommendation to an alternative recommendation to those in the report, which clearly is a matter for members, not for ourselves as officers. I will leave it there and open up for any questions, which between the 3 of us we will endeavour to answer for you.
Councillor Cubitt, would you like to kick off because you had some questions from the previous paper?
I'm happy for other people to. I'm happy to give way in the first instance. Thank you.
Okay, who has questions? Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. It's the usual chestnut of mine. I think when I chaired the meeting in January, the committee was told that the 88 million pension deficit had gone back to 0, and we all rejoiced. But I now notice it's now £91 million, which is a huge lump off of our asset base.
Who wants to answer that one?
I'll take it. Yeah, so the pension deficit obviously isn't the fact that the pension deficit has disappeared. Our contributions towards the scheme in order for the deficit to be cleared at the end of 19 years was such that we didn't have to increase our contributions, and in fact we didn't have to continue to pay our ongoing contributions for prior year deficits. So so that was the adjustment that we made, and obviously we prepaid our contributions for the next 3 years. So as far as I'm aware, that's what we were expecting to see. It's the fact that they didn't have to obviously we're still making a contribution to the pension fund based on our makeup of those people that are actually in the pension fund, but actually we didn't have to see an increase in contributions. In fact, they remained static. I think it's at 17% per year, and we no longer needed to pay our deficit amount. What will happen is when they do the triennial valuation in 2 years' time, they will reassess the fund, and if there's any change to that progress, we will have to update it at that time.
Councillor Faulkner, does that clarify the situation?
Yeah, I suppose it does, although I can't understand why I feel slightly nervous.
When we talk of deficits of that magnitude, you've got every right to feel nervous. Right, anybody else before we turn to one? Yes, Councillor James.
Chairman, I wasn't around in January on this committee. I've never really read these introduction to statement of accounts before, but I read very carefully, and I noticed there's a factual error in them, and I would hate anyone who read these accounts to be misled by what's included within them. It's on the one written by Councillor Golding, but it is repeated by Sue on hers. It's on the second page, third paragraph at the bottom. Savings of 13.7 million have been made by the council over the last 11 years. This is possibly true without impacting residents' frontline services. Now, bear in mind, we've closed one of our 2 receptions. We've stopped collecting rat catching, doing rat catching for free. We've got rid of pest control services. Our bulky waste collection is the free bulky waste collection has been reduced to the number of people who can apply for it. The number of community wardens has also been cut in the last 11 years. So there are significant cuts being made. Now, whether they want to rephrase that as we've maintained priority services, as we empty the bins weekly, that's fine. But I just think it's disingenuous. Well, it's actually completely blatantly dishonest to write, we have not impacted on frontline services. If I consider a resident contacting me as a frontline service and the reply and response I get is slower as a result of having less officers to contact and it takes them more time to do stuff, the fact that it takes 3 years to build an escape park because we've got no one in the council who can do it anymore, these are frontline services. So I really wish, if we're going to have this document and we're going to sign ourselves off as a council saying this is a true and factual document and be assessed against it, it's got to be factually true. It looks like a Conservative Party leaflet. I've seen more realistic In Touch leaflets. That paragraph has got to go. So I asked them whether that's something that can be removed or whether we're stuck with it because it's okay once it's written. I don't know. There's a few other questions I had, but it starts going into the detail. I think I will go quickly to page 80. That's a really simple one. We have a Conservative group, a Labour group, an Independent group, and a Liberal Democrat IC. I'm not sure why I'm not a group or part of a group. Why am I Liberal Democratic? It's a minor thing, but I think it should be changed just to show some sort of fairness. I'll start with those 2 questions. Can that be changed and can that be changed? And then I'll come back later if I've got time.
Right. Sue Curtin is indicating she's got an answer.
Thank you, Chair. I will certainly reflect that back to the portfolio holder because we can actually amend the narrative statement. So certainly we will update the Liberal Democratic. And I will certainly speak to her about whether she wishes to change the wording in that part of the document. And certainly I've never considered Councillor James anything but a group. Councillor Harvey, did you see your hand there?
Just quickly on that point and supporting Gavin's point, if the portfolio holder chooses to keep that statement in her statement, then can it be made absolutely clear that it is a political statement? Because it is, it's her statement as a politician, as completely separate from Sue's statement as the Section 151 officer. And so I wouldn't want to see Sue supporting a political statement, of course not, and she wouldn't dream of doing that, I'm sure. But in the context of the Cabinet members' comments, they are political and that's fine, that's absolutely fine. But if they are that, it should be a big statement on the top that says this is a political statement. Thank you, Chair.
I would have thought any statement from a portfolio holder was likely to be a political statement. I would assume to be so. So it wouldn't actually need a big flag. It should be obvious. Right. I have got Councillor Tilbury there in the shadows.
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit. I know the light's a bit on. I tried messing around with the light bulbs, but it didn't work. No, I think it's just that on this point, I don't think I was on auditing accounts last year, but I mean, as you know, Roger, I've been on auditing accounts virtually since all the time I've been on the council. But this narrative statement seems to be a relatively new thing, and it seems to take up quite a lot of the statement of accounts. And as I say, you know, for the portfolio, it is obviously political, but the statement of accounts is the statement of accounts of the council, not of the, you know, the whatever administration is running at any one time. And I wonder why it suddenly sort of appeared in here, because I kind of think someone's got to write all this stuff, and it costs us money to do this. And really, when I read the statement of accounts, all I want to see is the numbers, really, and what it relates to. I think Sue's going to answer that, though. Thanks.
Okay, and there are two sections there. One is the statement from the officer, which is a narrative statement to the accounts. The other is the introduction, which comes from the portfolio holder, which is new. But then if that is a decision of the administration, it should just be read as an introduction. It is not a narrative statement to the accounts. Over to Sue.
So that's not new this year. We've had that in the accounts before. But you're absolutely right. One is a prefix from the portfolio holder in terms of a statement she wishes to make about the accounts. The narrative statement is from me as an officer explaining the accounts. The idea being that if you don't particularly wish to read the full detail of the accounts, you can read a fairly summarised version and have an understanding of the performance of the council.
A picture may say 1,000 words, but 1,000 words can tell you quite a lot. It's Honolly. No, sorry, can I just turn to Councillor Vogt?
Thanks, Chair. A fairly minor thing, but I was intrigued on page 123 in the notes to the accounts. There's a reference, section 19, external audit costs. There was a reference there to an external audit services rebate. I wondered if somebody could explain that to me, why it applied once and didn't apply this year, it applied the previous year. And also in the next page at the top there, 21 employees remuneration, there's a little bit missing. I think the table's been plonked on top of some text. So at the end of the paragraph, it says, for this purposes, remuneration includes gross pay, all taxable benefits and termination benefits, but excludes. And I just wondered what it did exclude. Thank you, Chair.
Right. So are you handling that?
Sarah, can you pick that one up, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Chair. The external audit services rebate, sometimes once the audit is completed and the fees have been agreed, there is actually a rebate that comes through. So that rebate there related to 2018-19 fees. They are announced in arrears, so we've not yet been advised as to whether there was a rebate on the 2019-20 fees.
So could I ask?
Sure, I don't know if Maria might be able to confirm, or Larissa may be able to confirm the exact.
So
why there would be a rebate.
Are you saying that the rebate is provided by the auditors themselves? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like a rebate refund type thing.
Maria's going to come in here and tell us.
Can I just make that clear? It's not something that we do. It's with PSAA contracts specifically. So PSAA over the years have at times issued rebates to councils across the piece, and this would be one of those. But it's not something that we are involved in, because the contract is between the council and PSAA.
Okay. Thank you.
And Jenny's second point. What was excluded?
Yes, what's excluded in this table?
Yeah, if you could just give me a minute just to go back to the original document. Sorry, I'll have to look it up myself because my version is the same as yours. So I'll nip back in and then I'll feed back in a minute.
Thanks
Sorry.
very much. That's no problem.
Okay, we'll hold on that one. And I'll now go to Anneli, who is itching to come in.
No, so there's just a couple of areas that I'd like to talk about. Earlier, Sue very kindly, I asked Sue for some information. I wasn't trying to tricky, but I'm actually looking at the employee figures here. I asked for the total costs of the employees plus the number of FTEs. And on page 87 of the document, actually it's saying that the figure is 27.1, and I just wondered what the breakdown of that was that would render the other figure that I was given earlier of 21 million different. First question. Just to.
There'll be another one for Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry, Councillor Cubitt, which figure was it? The employees 27 million.
Yeah, I'm looking at page 14 of this paper, page 87 of the document, and I'm specifically looking at what the money was spent on, the 121.8 million, of which 27.1 million was to employees. Now, in 2018-2019, it was 26.6 million, so it's gone up. But actually, the figure that I'd asked earlier I can't reconcile it. So I just wondered what the difference would be between the figures.
The figures that you can see on page 87 in the statement of accounts and the equivalent figure for 2018-19 accounts is total employee costs. So that will include staff training, any other sort of staff type expenses. The figure that you were probably given earlier may well just be staff costs, as in salaries.
So that's 21.8 million.
Yeah, so that will probably be sort of salaries and employers on cost, pension and national insurance.
Okay.
Allowances. So.
Okay.
Yeah, the figure in the statement would have been total employee costs.
Okay, brilliant. Now, when I look at the second pie chart, which is where the money came from, we have a section called From the Reserves. I wonder whether you could just talk me through the reserves. I mean, I know that you walk us through it in the document, but I'd like to focus on the reserves, the application of the reserves, and I'd like to talk also about the new homes bonus and the monies that went into in terms of reserves, and I'd like to talk about the local infrastructure fund reserves and the criteria that those reserves have and how they can be changed in terms of application.
I'll take that one.
Is that a question or just a vague comment? Because you weren't very specific.
It's a question. I'd like to know what the rules are in terms of changing purpose of money sitting in accounts in reserve to then apply to pay for our running costs.
So I'm happy to pick that one up. So in terms of if we wanted to change the use of the reserves, it would form part of the budget report that gets approved by council in February. Under our financial regulations, which are part of the constitution, we're only allowed to apply the use of the reserves per the reason they were given. So if we have a general provision in reserves, so for example, if we have the many down reserve as an example where there was a sum of money put to one side, we have to have council or cabinet approval to actually allocate that to the appropriate service, and only once that council approval is given can we then actually apply that under our regulations, which is based on the amount that we're actually drawing from the reserve. So we can't just change the use of the reserves. The application of that £5.1 million will be per the budget proposals in the first place. So it's not that we run out of money at the end of the year, because actually, as you're probably aware, obviously we put money into reserves at the end of 1920. What that will have accounted for was a variety of different things that were meant to come from reserves. So one of those would have been the many down reserve, some of it would have been the homelessness reserve, therefore specific services for which we've held funding for.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, because you're referring to the total cumulative surplus to be distributed. Is that what you're referring to?
So in terms of at the year end, when we had a surplus, we obviously put it into the appropriate reserve. Yeah, and then obviously anything that's not on a specific reserve per our accounting policies goes into the MTFS risk reserve.
Okay, brilliant. I'm not going to dwell on all the valuations because I think that's been much rehearsed in terms of our commercial real estate. But I wonder whether you could talk me through the, on page 117, if you could talk me through the figure as at 31,320, which is the local infrastructure fund reserve, please.
Sorry, is that the 3.2?
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously we've over a number of years allocated funding to the reserve linked to a number of different lift grants that have been approved. So that funding is not just made up of unallocated sums, it's made up of grants that have already been approved that haven't necessarily been drawn down yet. And obviously it funds the capital programme. It doesn't fund revenue. And obviously I think the last lift report that went through very recently allocated a further £800,000 of funding, which obviously a part of that will have come out of that allocation. So yes, so that is a combination of some unallocated monies, but mainly it's actually the funds that we're waiting to draw down as projects complete.
And in terms of the new homes bonus that we received, because a couple of years ago, before you arrived, Sue, we were told that the new homes bonus grant was going to end up being zero. In fact, actually, it's looking pretty healthy. And I always said that to base our 5-year plan on an assumption that new homes bonus would be zero was really a nonsense, and I've been proven right. But I understand that we did agree that some of the new homes bonus would go to the local infrastructure fund reserve, and is that going to continue, and what percentage?
So in the council report in February, obviously we've taken the prudent decision because of the ending of the current new homes bonus mechanism. We have removed it over the period of the next 3 years completely from the accounts of the council. So actually by the time we get to 23-24, we're not expecting any new homes bonus. And actually it's split over 3 different reserves, and I can't tell you off the top of my head how much goes into the lift reserve. Sarah may be able to tell you, but actually we've already approved the current MTFS, which actually peters out the new homes bonus to zero.
Yes, but what if it continues to be received?
So if the so obviously we are waiting on an understanding. We know the spending review has been delayed, and we are expecting now to only have a 1-year spending review rather than 3. We also know there's likely to be a delay in the the provisional local government settlement, at which point we were hoping to have some resolution in terms of what is the alternative to new homes bonus. We currently don't know what that's going to be, or what a potential new scheme will look like, or whether in light of post-COVID and economic recovery, something completely different will be put in its place. If we are able to receive additional funding, that will obviously be picked up as part of the administration's budget proposals in terms of what they wish to do with it.
Okay, and if it continues unchanged?
So it's perfectly possible that instead of actually, they may choose to allow the current scheme to run for a further year, in which case the current accounting policies still apply, which means it will be allocated to the reserves on the current percentages.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sarah was wanting to speak. Sarah Finch?
Yep, thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that on the current policy for new homes bonus, the first 250,000 received is used to support the revenue budget. The allocation to the lift reserve under the current policy is 20%.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else want to raise questions on this paper? If not, let's have a look at the recommendation. And I think there is an element of, hello, Sarah.
Hello, me again. Sorry, Councillor Vaughan, in answer to your question about what was excluded from the comment on the employer's remuneration, the rest of the sentence should have said excludes employer pension contributions.
Oh, okay.
And that's in accordance with the regulations, so I'll make sure that that's tidied up for the final version. Apologies.
Thank you. Chair, sorry, I think Councillor Tilbury wishes to come in.
Then certainly he can.
Oh, thanks, yeah, thanks, Sue. Yeah, I'll just query on page 29 of the actual accounts, or page 102 of the report. The very last sentence on there refers to the write down is basically the decrease in the value of the MALs reflects a significant fall in the retail sector in the past 12 months. Just to be clear, is that based on the fall in the previous 12 months? This is not connected to coronavirus at all. This is purely because the 31st of March, really at that point, we didn't really know much of what was likely to happen. Whereas obviously now we are. I mean, we'd like to see massive falls in next year's accounts, but this purely relates to the drop off in the retail sector in the last year, which is, you know, there are obviously a number of issues. But
I think Sue's got an answer to that.
So I would say predominantly due to the previous 12 months. We can't say categorically that there was no impact, even though it kind of was only those last few weeks, because obviously those valuations are updated. But I think you'll be right in saying it is predominantly due to the previous sort of national position on retail and the valuations therefore.
Okay, back to the recommendation. I think the committee approved the statement of accounts for the year ended 31st March 2020 as set out in Appendix 2, subject to a review at a subsequent meeting. And I think we'll just leave it at that. Everybody happy? No dissent? Splendid. Which moves us on to paper 8, which is the property investment strategy, and is Martin Jones with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is just to update everybody on the property investment strategy and some of the actions coming from last June's meeting. You'll recall that the property investment strategy was reported as being implemented in full and is expected to deliver an additional contracted income of 1.7 million per annum by the end of 2021. The property team and property services team will now focus on sort of the proactive asset management of the existing portfolio, as well as reviewing opportunities in its portfolio, and will continue to monitor the market for potential sort of opportunities. Any future acquisitions are likely to be funded from disposals, with the receipts sort of invested to provide enhanced returns. Any disposals will be assessed on their performance, which are either underperforming, generating a windfall return, produce low or no income, or have a high management cost in terms of future maintenance fees and time. Worth pointing out, the council's contract with their previous property investment advisors, Cushman and Wakefield, expired in July, and they've been replaced by Jones Lang LaSalle as its new advisors. JLL will be advising the council on possible options to consider and adopt in future property strategies, as well as developing asset management plans. It's the intention that the advisors will also complement the property team as a resource for general property advice when needed. In addition, they will be providing advice on the council's regeneration projects, which is likely to involve some of the council's key property assets. The present COVID-19 crisis is creating difficulties for some tenants in paying the rent, and the property team are working closely with the finance team and economic recovery teams and adopting the various approaches previously agreed by council. These initiatives sort of include matters such as deferred rents and agreeing monthly payment plans to assist the tenants. These aspects have been monitored closely. We're coming up to the next quarter's rent now, which our demands are out, and we anticipate sort of quite a lot of activity there. So I've got to be joined up with finance and the economic recovery team to sort of address issues there. We've also undertaken a risk analysis of all the tenants and the most vulnerable tenants to highlight the potential exposure to defaults. And that's an ongoing process which is continuing to evolve and be monitored. Work will continue as well with JLL or advisors in agreeing an appropriate benchmark for assessing the performance of the property portfolio as a whole, and will be a little bit more sort of granular going forward, covering issues such as sort of various yield indices, rental growth, void rates, the sector of those void rates as well, rents demanded, rents received, and a capital expenditure budget, and also, quite importantly, break clauses that could be exercised, so we get a full and clear picture of what is there. There are a number of indices out in the market to use. Some you can pay for, but we understand JLL have their own indices, so we're investigating that to see if it is an appropriate one to use as a dashboard sort of going forward. The allocation of funds for the acquisition to get that enhanced income has been has been achieved, and it exceeded the £30 million budget by 2.49 million. So the first tranche of disposals, the funds will need to be used to recoup that. Underneath that is a table of the performance, which sort of you can see, and that's the sort of headlines of the report. So if there are any queries, happy to try to answer them.
If I can kick off, you've talked about risk from tenants. Is there any intention to bring a report to this committee, possibly under pink papers, to discuss that?
I think it would be a sort of a good idea going forward to highlight the sorts of risks. There's just general default, companies going into CVAs, so there's a whole a myriad of things to look at going forward. But yes.
If Ellie can add that to the work programme.
Sorry, Councillor Gardner, can I come in, please?
Yes, Sue.
Yes, I'm not sure that we would bring a full report on all the individual complexities around each individual investment property and commercial property, but certainly as part of our indices, if you like, in terms of developing the report and the monitoring information for you, we'd certainly be happy to include a summary. It would not be appropriate for us to bring back the full list, because obviously that's part of our in-house monitoring, but I'd actually be very happy to bring you a summary and identify any key issues.
I think we'll be happy with that. With JLL, is there any intention for them to come and brief the council at some future point?
Yes, I can't see. They can do. Yeah, there shouldn't be a problem. So understanding what they want to report on, I think, needs a bit of clarity.
Yeah, that's not on for the work programme. And on disposals, I know that these are uncertain times, but are there any negotiations in progress on disposal at the moment?
Yes, they are. Yeah, there's probably 3 in disposals and one going.
Martin, I don't think you should go into the specific details.
No, I wasn't going to mention.
I'm not asking for specifics.
Yeah.
Councillor James.
Yes, Chair, just really to say, I think we're responsible for setting the policies and the strategies and the framework within which the officers work in. I think once you get down to individual businesses, companies, sites, you end up in this world of pink papers where we're sitting in a smoke-filled room with no smoke in it, having a conversation away from the public. I think wherever possible, we must have the debate in the public domain. So it's more important that we stick to looking at the policies around whether it's financial investment, property investment, the strategies we have, the policies we have, the framework we give to the officers, then reviewing the performance of those policies and that framework in a more global sense, rather than kind of getting into the nitty gritty and finding that we turn the webcast off every 30 seconds.
I wasn't suggesting we start naming names, but I was more concerned with the sort of problem which might be a bit too confidential to do in an open session. Then I would leave that to officers and then we'll review that as and when it happened. Anybody else? I'm sure. Right, Councillor Vogue and then Councillor Cubitt.
Thank you, Chair. I was interested in paragraphs 4.3 and 4.4, which are on page 6 of the additional paper. And I wondered at what point would we be putting variances into our budget, because it implies in 4.3 and 4.4 that we're leaving everything as it is, and yet 4.4 reads to me as if there's quite a risk, not just a cash flow issue in delayed payments or something, but actually that there is a significant risk to income. And I wondered at what point then would we be changing it? Thank you. Sue's got her hand up there, Chair.
Okay, so obviously 4.3, the 1.91 million is specifically in relation obviously to the additional £32.5 million spent on the property investment strategy, with those agreements recently being in place and no concern with those particular tenants at the current time, that they will continue to meet the requirements. What you will notice is that there has been a small adjustment to the Eli Lilly line because there's been a delay in the completion of the building, and therefore the part year receipt of that rent obviously is slightly lower than we would have anticipated, but we're still ahead of the £1.7 million that we were intending to achieve by the end of 2021. But our expectation is we will achieve the full £2.31 million in total from that investment property activity next year. In terms of the commercial income, that reflects the same information that's been provided in detail in the Q1 monitoring report that's going to council on the 16th of October, where we talk about the concerns we have around property income and the fact that we need to monitor it more, continue to monitor it. We do anticipate that it's a cash flow issue, and we will, when allowed, restart our debt recovery action as appropriate, linked to the economic recovery. And what we're saying at the moment is we anticipate at least some percentage of our current rent that's due to be a bad debt, and that's what that 320,000 that's noted in the report represents. Obviously, as we go through the year and we get a better understanding, because of the rent holidays, it's a bit of a misnomer at the moment in terms of understanding what that likely impact is going to be. So you're absolutely right, we flag it as a significant risk, and we will continue to monitor it in year-end update as we go.
Okay, thanks, Sue. And I think on debt recovery and things, there's talk about that in an agenda item further down, which I think it would be helpful to have a discussion about. I think it's in the audit paper, I'm not quite sure.
I think it comes under internal audit. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Cubitt.
So Martin, thanks a million for your summary. Just a couple of things. And previously we've had an appendix, and the appendix shows the history from the get-go of this portfolio. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd really appreciate it if we could retain that appendix, because it has all the key information as opposed to the brief summary. In terms of the requests made with regards to defaults, etc., and I'd like to kind of make a reference again to the hit, the £1.8 million hit that we've had when you look at the total investment made on Winchester Road versus the valuation today. I was wondering, whilst obviously we don't want to go into the minutiae, and I was kind of trying to find out from Ernst & Young whether there's an obligation on the part of the borough to us as a governance committee, at what point we should be notified of a significant loss like that. Because of course, when we start to talk about priorities for the council going forward, we spend an inordinate amount of time discussing raising the cost of the cemeteries, etc., in order to save £20,000. And then at the same time, totally not blaming you, Martin, at all. Obviously, there are, firstly, you're new, but secondly, we're talking about large sums of investment, so you're likely to see these kind of hits, and that's why I always wanted to see this portfolio not go into the whole portfolio, but be seen. I don't know what the committee's views are. Do we want a table that tells us when there is a revaluation greater than, I don't know, 100,000 loss or greater than 500,000 loss on a revaluation of an asset that's in our commercial real estate portfolio?
Over to Sue.
So in terms of these particular properties, obviously we always accept that the valuations go up and down and they impact on the balance sheet rather than the day-to-day running and revenue costs of the authority. And therefore, which is why we monitor them and we don't buy them and resell them sort of within 12 months. We make sure that we understand each asset and whether we're actually getting a reasonable return on that asset, which we currently still are. So therefore, but we can, and obviously it was only valued once a year and not everything is valued every year. So more than happy to reintroduce the appendix and the changes in valuations as they happen each year so that you have an update on those. In terms of the full portfolio, that it's a normal turn of events that values go up and down. What I would think the committee would rather see as part of the summary information that we bring as we develop the information for you on the property investment strategy is if there are themes. So if, for example, we know that retail sector is coming under particular pressure, what we'd like to be able to do is actually give you information about particular themes rather than individual properties. We're obviously happy to take views from the committee, but I think that would be getting into far too much detail in terms of each individual property. But what we want to do as part of the property investment strategy, working with JLL, is to fully review all of our assets, identify the assets that we feel that are no longer suitable for us to hold, those that we wish to do something with and those that are giving us a good return. Alongside the benchmarking, we can then actually give you a more rounded summary of like the overall performance of the asset base.
Okay, Emily.
Well, not really, I'm afraid. Sue, I thank you for your response, but with great respect, this portfolio was an investment portfolio, and therefore the underlying value of the asset is also material. This isn't an asset that it's not like buying a gilt that goes to maturity and then we get the face value back. And the whole point of the 30 million that was taken out of the investment bond portfolio was that we would preserve the capital and seek revenue. And you can't separate the two. They're very important components of this. So I would not want to see this portfolio's capital depreciate whilst chasing income and say everything's hunky-dory, because you know, if we end up with assets that are worth 15 million, but we've front-ended the profit, which is very common practice, I understand, Martin, isn't it, in the property market? You can buy assets that you know might go down in value, but you improve your income portfolio. Is that true, Martin?
It happens sort of on occasions, especially in the secondary sector. Yeah.
So,
okay, so
I think in terms of the overall property portfolio, the overall value of those assets is far in excess of the ones that we brought. So in terms of an overall return and overall capital value, it's far in excess of the original value. And obviously we look at the property strategy as a whole. So therefore we wouldn't be expecting to bring back individual valuations. What we'd expect to see is there a reason for that? And if there was cause for concern, to identify it as part of a trend. So we certainly wouldn't be expecting to bring back individual property valuations because that is not the purpose of the Audit and Accounts Committee.
So just sorry, Mr. Chairman, going back to a comment I made with the auditor specifically, and I'd like to know whether Martin's involved. In terms of the other assets valuation, i.e. operational land and buildings, Martin, are you involved in that valuation with JLL as well, or are you purely involved in the commercial real estate portfolio?
I am involved in it, and it is actually Colliers who do the asset valuations. JLL are advised on property investment strategy. But yes, we those properties are valued as well.
So would you mind just very, very briefly, and then I'll hand over to everybody else. I don't want to be a pain in the neck. But in terms of the operational land of buildings, that's gone down from the 2018-19 figure of 94 million down to 87 million, whilst the investment property portfolio has gone up to 300 million, and yet we switched 30 million out of the investment portfolio and into commercial real estate. So actually that looks like our commercial real estate portfolio has gone down by 15 million. Is that a correct analysis of the figures?
I'd have to have a look at it again, I'm afraid, and come back to you with an answer.
Okay, don't worry. Thanks.
Okay, anybody else? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to support Annalee's point about the purpose of the fund and the reason it was set up. It's not the whole property portfolio. It was specific and it was detailed. And so if there's changes to that specific detail for that particular fund, I'd want to see it rather than rolling it into the broader property portfolio. So from that perspective, I do actually support what Annalee's asking for.
Yeah.
It would be sensible for that specific element to be clear, because that was the purpose it was set up for. Rather than rolling it into the bigger pot, so to speak. So if that's possible, I would like to see that, like Annalee has suggested.
Well, we have muted that in the past. Sue?
So in terms of the specific ones for the 32.5 million, I'm more than happy to support Councillor Cubitt's request for the appendix to come back, which has that update in the valuation. So perfectly happy to have on those, but obviously on the full property portfolio, to bring back individual valuations would not be appropriate. So in terms of the ones that in the property investment strategy made up of the 32.5 million, yes, we're more than happy to bring back the appendix which had those valuations on, but obviously it'll only have an annual change in the valuation. So we could do that as part of the out-term performance on property investment strategy.
Okay, and then were there to be such a variance, and be it 100,000, 500,000, if there's such a variance, I would expect at least officers to bring that to our attention, so that we don't have to go searching through the books looking for it, but actually that it's brought to the committee's attention when it is such a big difference in terms of what we're presenting and what the score is. And I'm open to suggestion, as Annalee suggested, it could be 100,000 or 500,000, but if it's to that scale, then members should be, from a scrutiny perspective, from an oversight perspective, at least brought to our attention.
But this is Audit and Accounts Committee, not scrutiny.
It's the oversight role of the committee, isn't it?
I think the thought about the performance panel, that's probably where you'd look at it, which comes under scrutiny rather than audit and accounts.
As long as it is captured and as long as it is looked at.
I think it's worth flagging it up then with the chair of scrutiny, and I'll look at Councillor Faulkner to pass that on.
Yeah, will do, Chair. But I would say just one thing, whilst also agreeing with the previous speakers. When the property investment strategy was established and the money was taken out of the Treasury management system because we were only getting 1.6, 1.8% return. So the objective was to improve our revenue generation, but obviously protect the value of the fund, but not necessarily, I think, micromanage it when bits and pieces go up and down, but taking it as a view of the, was it the 25 million that was originally put into it. So at the moment, we're still doing well on the revenue, but it's just a short-term problem on one or two of those capital values.
Yeah, just because it's moved into property doesn't mean that we should forget about some security of value. That was always part of the Treasury management aspect. And that was carried over, if I remember rightly, into the property strategy on the 25 million. So I think Annalee's right, we should carry on looking at it. Okay. Anybody else got any questions on this? So I've got two. I've got Councillor Taylor and then Councillor James and then Councillor Cubitt again.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, I'd like to agree with Councillor Cubitt and Councillor Harvey that this is supposed to be an investment strategy, and therefore we want to look at it specifically as an investment strategy. And I personally found it a little bit confusing reading this agenda item, because there was so much in it that didn't relate to the investment strategy of the 30 million pool, and therefore the lines got a little bit blurred between the two. So it's useful to get those out. But what I was interested in particularly was in respect of what Sue and Martin were saying about the fact that looking again at how performance might be managed, what the measures might be to look at things. And I think it'd be really useful at some point for us to know what the procedure and the processes and what you would be looking at, because from an audit perspective, how you do it and us understanding and feeling comfortable with how you're going to do that is more important than us diving into the minutiae of the actual detail. I think we need to just be satisfied that the process gives a level of assurance.
Sue's got an answer to that.
Yeah, so on the first point, the annual property plan that was approved so the property investment strategy annual property plan for 2021, which was approved by Cabinet, I believe, I can't remember, I think it was February, obviously does say that we will move away from the monitoring of the individual specific properties, and actually because we've spent the fund, these are the things we're now going to monitor on. So to some extent, this report is the first time that it's starting to look at something slightly different, which is probably why you're used to seeing something different. So more than happy that to make sure we pick up the point around, we want to see the individual £32.5 million, how that's made up, what's the history and what's the current position on it, and report back on anything specific that's changing in there, but reminding ourselves that we are managing it as an overall fund. But no, what we would expect to do is start bringing you more information in terms of the asset management itself, and how we're planning to do that, because obviously previously asked for information around disposals, etc. So as the report develops and we work further with JLL, we'd expect to be able to bring more information back to you, and absolutely agree that the benchmarking that you've asked for, we can let you know how we plan to do that, which is, as you say, is different to what does it specifically say, as opposed to some assurance, I think Paul's waving at me, but some assurance from audit that actually we're approaching it in the proper way.
Mr. Gundry?
Yep, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to jump in and just inform the committee that we do have property investment strategy on the audit plan this year. So we'll be looking at the process to ensure that the strategy is being followed, and then providing assurance to the committee. Hope that helps.
That does answer my next question, which is when we're going to see another report on property management. So thank you for that. Right, Councillor James.
Yeah, Chairman, I think that the point's been fairly raised around everyone else. It's clearly, I mean, the property investment fund, you can't have property investment by a committee that meets 3 times a year, 4 times a year. It has to be done. You have to have a certain amount of distance. Clearly, the fund has been set up. It's got specific criteria about how it spends that money and what it spends it on. It's got specific targets around the investment return. So those things are in place. As an audit committee, our job then is to say, oh, it was set a target of 6% return. It's only achieved 1%. Let's look at that. And yet a global value of this £30 million fund, has it dropped off significantly? I mean, we know, and when we get to the financial investments, no one is asking BlackRock Fixed Income Global Opportunities Fund to come and tell us exactly what they're invested in at the moment, because it's gone down by £2 million. Because you take these risks. The investment, the value of any investment could go up, could go down, and obviously revenue is more important to us. Long term, we hope it will creep up. Although property doesn't always work that way. So I don't think we need to worry ourselves with micromanaging this, because otherwise we're going to defeat the object. It's about, you set a target, come back with that amount of money, and if you haven't, well, what needs to change? What's wrong about it? Certainly, I would imagine that given the current climate, the office income is going to be something that's going to be a real burden as leases expire, as people do more work.
Lost you, Councillor James.
That would be fun.
I'm not sure what would be fun. But okay, moving on to Councillor Cubitt again.
Thank you. So, Martin, just a couple of things just to run through, if you don't mind. In the accounts, it refers to Eli Lilly having an additional capital expenditure of 14 million going forward. Was that planned, and are you involved in that transaction, and has that amount gone up? I've got four quick questions.
Right, I'm not closely involved in that transaction sort of myself, but it is an ongoing project. I don't believe there's been any significant change in that sum.
So, you come in there?
Yeah, so there's no change in the actual funding. It's just about the delay from the project last year has slipped into this year. It's the same original funding stream, and it's the last of the allocations from the property investment strategy in terms of I think it's £8.9 million. There's that in here. Yeah, that we will be contributing once the building's actually been completed. So there's no change in the original scheme or the value of the scheme. It's more to do with the slippage.
So that's exactly what I thought. It was 8, but it says 14.3 in the accounts. Because that's exactly what I thought it was 8, because that was one of the principal reasons why our portfolio went from 30 to 35, because actually the portfolio was being used to sub the Eli Lilly deal.
Thank you, Sue.
I'm muting. Yeah, so when we tidied up the capital programme in February, we had it in as a separate line, and we actually moved it and added it into the Eli Lilly line because it's all part and parcel of the same scheme. So that 8.9
8 million hasn't changed.
Nothing's changed. It's just we've just shown it differently in the programme.
Okay, cool. Now, in terms of
sort of request from Councillor Cubitt.
Sorry?
I think that was a request from Councillor Cubitt.
Okay, so tender rules, Martin, just out of interest, when you sell a property under local authority rules, what happens if you only have one bidder when you're trying to sell a disposal?
We have a section 123 valuation undertaken by a third party to ensure that it's value for money.
Okay. And who normally does that section 123 then?
It's a chartered. It would be a chartered surveying firm. We've used sort of many in the past, but we are trying to rationalise that now with JLL going forward.
Okay, brilliant. Because with the village hotels and with the leisure park, unusually and very peculiarly, we only ended up with one bidder in both of those very large projects. I hadn't appreciated, but somebody told me recently that actually local authorities were obligated to have 3. And whilst I knew it was very peculiar that there was only one in each of those cases, I wondered how we dealt with it when that happened.
If there's a procurement process and there's a number of parties, then and they drop out, you just negotiate with who's left.
Okay, and then finally, when we have land that we own and then we give it away for free, what impacts do you have to consider? I'm specifically referring to the land at the football club that we've given away to Hampshire County Council, because would that 30 whatever % of our ownership have been in our investment portfolio, or where would that asset have originally sat in terms of valuation?
It would probably, it would sit in the operation portfolio, I would have thought, but I'm not aware of the history of that, I'm afraid.
No, and maybe Sue is, she's got her hand up.
No, I was just going to say, Councillor Cubitt, we can pick that question up and receive back offline. I think we'd have to look that one up for you.
Perfect, but I would imagine that it does sit in our property investment strategy, but I really appreciate that, because I mean, I would imagine that it represents a sizable value amongst our very large values. Thank you, brilliant, thank you very much.
I suspect we probably acquired it sometime in the past at zero value, and it may well still be at that value. But we'll get a report back to let us know exactly how that's going to happen.
Yes, but with great respect, Mr. Chairman, and Martin can correct me here, but I'm not sure that with assets that were originally valued at 0, just because they were loaned or a gift, that we're allowed on behalf of the residents of Basingstoke to then treat them as if they're worth zero.
I still think we come under value for money on that.
No, it wouldn't.
Okay, can we note the report? Oh no, Councillor James is coming in again.
I'm just trying to help Councillor Cubitt. I think you'll find quite often that we don't dispose of land. We tend to give it on a very, very long peppercorn lease to someone else. So certainly in relation to village hotels, that land was not given away. It was sold for 2.5 million. We made a significant contribution towards the preparation of the land, which was greater than the value of the sale, and it's on a peppercorn lease for the next 125 years or something. And I think the same applies. That piece of land, the strip of the football club, was part of obviously the football ground. That was a peppercorn rent to the club. Obviously, that's not going to be the situation any longer, but obviously it's the width of a road and completely useless and landlocked. So I would imagine its value is very minimal, but it may be we're not giving it away to Hampshire County Council. We may be giving it to them on a very, very, very long lease for the peppercorn rent.
I think that's something else that could be clarified.
Sorry, but that's exactly my point. So if if JLL valued the land at the football club to be X, and we decide to give it away on a peppercorn rent for 0, then I would have thought that we as audit and account should be notified of a significant amount of money that our residents actually are seeing given away for free, a bit like the land on the car park that was basically given away to the village hotels. I mean, I think both those transactions represent, I mean, if I was running a commercial organisation and I had shareholders, I don't think my shareholders would be very happy with me if I suddenly
I think point of view, but in terms of the operation, I think that comes under the performance panel again. It's a scrutiny function.
So can I just come in there? So any of our disposals, if, as Martin said, they're less than best consideration, we have to have a 1, 2, 3 valuation. We have to justify why we would dispose for the land at best and at best consideration. It has to go to Cabinet for discussion, and if it's more than £2 million, it has to actually have Secretary of State approval. So actually, we do have processes as per the Constitution. So even if it is, even if we give it away for nil, we can't just do that without they going through the proper governance process.
Okay. Anybody else before we just note the report? Note the report. All agreed. Thank you. Items 9 and 10. Item 9 is pretty straightforward. It just tells us forecasts can always be wrong. Paper 10, Treasury Management. Who's taking that one?
I am, Chairman.
Thank you, Suzanne. Suzanne Jones.
Thank you. Item 10 is another monitoring report on Treasury Management, brought to you in line with policies and practices. I think the only comment I'd say by way of introduction is the interest rates do remain low, and over the weekend we've seen other rumours about interest rates, which clearly we will ponder on as we move forward into planning the future year's budget. That speaks for itself as to why our investment income is lower than the budget had been expected, but that has been taken into account in the budget monitoring, which Sue referred to earlier as having been done in Q1 and will continue to be monitored throughout the year. I think that's all I would like to say by introduction. Happy to take questions.
Okay, questions. Ooh. If there are no questions, hello, Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you. It's just really a question on Appendix 2 on page 185, which relates to the lending to local authorities. I was sort of just looking at this because Councillor Cubitt raised a really interesting point about this in our last meeting about, you know, what happens when these loans just keep rolling on and rolling on. Do they end up really being long-term loans than short-term loans? And so I was quite sort of interested to sort of have a look at that when I got the papers. And I mean, there are some notable cases where these loans do just seem to continually renew, as it were. You know, so as soon as it expires, it then pops up again as another loan, usually for the same amount. I mean, one of the easiest ones to trace is sort of Thurrock Council here, where literally, you know, one loan finishes, another one begins, and it's always for the same amount. And I just wondered how we classify that, because in theory you could say it's a short-term loan, but when it is rolling on like this, it's not really a short-term loan. And looking at the narrative that goes with this, it does suggest that, you know, if we were going to do it for sort of a year, we would be looking at due diligence. And I'm just wondering whether we count these loans as something that needs due diligence when they keep rolling on. Do we actually get the money back before we let them have it again for another 6 months?
I'll pass over to Suzanne, who's got will speak on this.
Well, the first thing I would say is, as we currently sit here today, we have no loans with other local authorities. And I actually did rework the table and look at the groupings of the loans that were there. We absolutely, each loan stands on its own merits, and the money comes back to us. If then we have money available and it's a local authority that's looking for funding, then we will potentially place our money with them again. We would only do that on the advice of our advisors, our link close. There might be certain local authorities where one would not want to put money for whatever reason, and I haven't got any specifically in mind, but you would think perhaps twice. All of those have been with our advisors' advice, but currently we've not got any money vested with any other local authority. I don't know if Sue wants to add anything to that.
Well, I think you answered the question, which was we get the money back before we lend it out again, but each 6-month loan stands on its own merits and is a secure loan, and we take advice before we lend.
That's correct.
What the recipient does with it is their affair, but it's only short-term financing that they're getting.
That's correct.
Happy with that, Councillor Taylor? Splendid. Councillor Burks?
So just for clarity then, on page 184, it says that you're expecting loans to the total amount of 10 million to be repaid on or before the 20th of August. So that's happened, presumably.
I understand that has happened.
Yes, that absolutely has happened.
Nods from everybody.
Yes, absolutely.
So at the moment, we have no short-term loans outstanding.
That's correct.
Okay. Are we happy with the report? Looks like we are. Okay, report noted. Internal audit. Mr. Gundry, where are you? And Richard Bevan.
That'll be me, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you, Richard.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so this is the my progress report for the work of the internal audit team that we've completed during July and August this year. And it also shows the current position with the outstanding audit recommendations. Just areas to highlight, the audits completed are shown in table, the table in paragraph 4.1 of my report. That's on page 189. And this report shows the 4 reviews that we've completed, of which you'll see there's 1 full assurance, 2 substantial assurances, and 1 reasonable assurance. And these summary reports are, to these reviews are shown in appendices 2 to 5 of my report. With regards to recommendations, paragraph 4.2 of the report shows the latest position of outstanding audit recommendations where the agreed actions have yet to be completed, and they're all detailed in appendix 1 starting on page 193 of my report. The rest of it's fairly, I think, self-explanatory, so I won't go into more detail, but obviously open to any questions you may have.
Richard, how much has COVID impacted on the follow through on the recommendations?
You probably see from the comments, Chair, on Appendix 1, it's had a big impact. There's no getting away from that. Key areas that have been affected are HR, property, and IT. They all have what on paper there looks like a lot of work outstanding, which it has been put to the back burner whilst they've been at the front of the pandemic response. So I think we need to bear that in mind when considering that the originally agreed completion dates for those recommendations. Safe to say, yeah, they are not going to meet them, but I think we have to obviously make allowances for that.
Is there anything there that gives you concern?
Concern? I'm always concerned when the recommendations aren't done, Chair. But I think we, as you know, we monitor them monthly. We send out monthly reminders, and we will look at them on almost on a. We'll start with the red ones and then the amber ones, and any that don't get where we get no response. We also have the escalation. If my team get no response, I will ask Paul to refer it to the head of service for a response, and we will get there in the end.
And before Councillor Vokes jumps in, sorry, Mr. Gundry, you want to speak?
Yeah, so I just want to jump in there and just mention that in terms of outstanding recommendations, there are no fundamental outstanding recommendations. So I think that's just to give a bit more assurance to the committee.
Thank you. Before we get to Councillor Vokes, who wants to raise something on debtors, it dropped from substantial to reasonable in the space of one audit. What went wrong?
Well, I'm supposed to be fair, I didn't say what went wrong. Previously, when we've done a debtors audit, we've done sample testing, and we've said have they followed followed the processes, governance arrangements as defined by our corporate debt management policy. What we did this time is we tried to add a bit of value to the audit and actually looked at the policy itself, and kind of felt that it actually needs strengthening a bit, especially in these current times when money is tight. It could do more. The policy itself could do more. The Exchequer Services team themselves have adapted their processes very admirably to the COVID environment. Following those processes, but what we found is there is a heavy reliance on manual processes, on officer knowledge of individual debts and arrangements and that, and probably there needs to be a better arrangement between Exchequer and legal services with regards to referring debts on. Obviously, in these current times, we wouldn't want to be referring too many to legal straight away. When we started the report, we were kind of saying, well, we need to toughen the policy up. How that pans out will obviously be determined by the review that was suggested in the recommendation. But we're certainly saying that our debt management policy, we need to be a bit more proactive, a bit more vigorous with how we do it, and a bit more collaboration, I think, between the Exchequer and other services. And also the other point I'd make is that we kind of feel that the reporting could be more clear to senior management, so they have a better picture of not just the current debt recovery rates, but also the historic debt. There is a fair amount of historic debt, and we almost got the impression and acceptance that we wouldn't necessarily get that back. But I think we do need to be more proactive and more flexible with how we manage and how we chase that particular debt. So that's why we kind of felt we need to be a bit more vigorous with things, and the recommendations hopefully emphasise why we dropped from the substantial down to the reasonable assurance.
Thank you. Mr. Gundry again.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just following up on what Richard said there, which is we've identified those issues, but as the committee can see, that all the recommendations have been accepted by the relevant officer, and we are aware that they're working on those at, I was going to say as we speak, but obviously not at 8:15, but they are working through those recommendations, and again we can keep the committee informed of progress in the normal way.
Probably a question for Sue, but have we chased up the outstanding debt and are we making progress on it now?
So obviously government have set further guidance around the recovery of both for our property tenants, and obviously we have reintroduced council tax and business rates debt recovery, and obviously but we're trying to make sure that we're working with individuals and businesses to be able to support them through this difficult period. So yes, we have reinstigated where we can. But obviously we're doing that within the guidance of government at the current time in terms of what you can and what you can't chase. And whilst we can chase some debt, we're not allowed to have evictions or particularly around the commercial properties. So actually what we're trying to do is work with our tenants and with council taxpayers and business rates to try and agree a payment plan rather than just going for a straightforward debt recovery action. But I think, as Richard says, I think we've recognised that the policy, in whatever new normal looks like, it could do would be a bit more robust.
Right, so I'll now take any other questions. Councillor Faulkner.
Yeah, just a quick question, Chair. It does strike me, apart from the COVID-19, we've had an awful lot of officers working from home. So going forward, will that affect a lot of the audits that you can effectively do and a lot of the processes that will have to be changed to match that?
Andre?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As we take each audit, there's a couple of things there. Yes, different processes and practices are being put in place by officers to ensure they can do the best they can in the role they fulfil. And Richard's already mentioned that in terms of the debtors team. We have to adapt the way we work with internal audit to fulfil the audit plan. I'm doing my best to ensure that we do complete whole of the audit plan. I will be taking a review of the audit plan after the 6-month period, so that'll be next month. And if I feel that there needs to be some changes to the plan, obviously I'll inform the committee at the early stage so they're aware of any potential changes to the plan. But at the moment, I'm hoping to have all the plan completed by the end of the year.
Can we add that to the work programme for just a quick report back at the next meeting?
Chair, would follow that through on the progress to date report. If I'm not going to change audit plan, there'll be nothing to report. But again, the regular progress reports you get will reflect any changes if there is to be any.
If there's no changes, I'll be grateful to know that there were no changes.
Okay. Would a simple email suffice to the committee for that, Chair, rather than a report?
Are we happy with that? Looks like it.
Okay, thank you.
Right, anybody else? Anneli? Councillor Cubitt?
Yeah, just Paul and Richard, I'd like your view. I mean, obviously, it's not a normal environment. We have got a lot of employees working from home. Do you feel comfortable that the borough is being protected from potential risks and that employees are able to work as equally well as they do where they to work from the office? What's the risk, in your opinion, of them working from home versus them being in the office?
If I take that one, Chair. From my point of view, whether you're sat at a desk in an office or sat at home, you're using the same technology and same processes. So I feel fairly comfortable that the processes are being followed. That's why we do our audits, and the audits that we've done to date have not identified any major concerns for us in terms of the impact of COVID. So relaxed is not the word I want to use. Obviously, we are wary that the circumstances are continually changing, and obviously we will continue to monitor any processes, and we have had dialogue with officers where they've sought advice from us in terms of they want to change a process, and would it be sufficient, would it suffice if they change a process in such a way, so they're coming to us for assurance, that's what I like to see, that they're being proactive about it with us as well. So at the moment I'm as comfortable as can be.
Okay, thank you. As a kind of a supplementary, I know that in the private sector, a number of companies have got concerns that employees actually aren't completing the full days, and that there's a presenteeism issue. I understand that they have computer systems that are now monitoring work output to make sure that they're getting full days work of work. Is that an area of concern for Basingstoke and Dean? Are you sufficiently comfortable that the staff that are at home are working as hard as they would ordinarily if they were in the office?
Okay. I can't answer for whole of authority, but I think that you can see what great work the staff have conducted through COVID-19 and how they've supported various situations that they found themselves in. I'd rather look at outputs rather than presenteeism, and I don't have any concerns, or no concerns been raised with me about that, but again, that would be down to each individual manager to manage their own team in that right way.
So you wanted to say something on that?
Yeah, so I think that obviously the senior leadership team have no concern over the productivity of staff. We are now managing remotely and by outputs. There have been no increases in complaints from customers because of our services. So in terms of those that are working at home in office-related roles, we've actually found the process to be very positive. The number of our frontline activity has moved over to digital channels. We knowing our customers are actually preferring that activity to be accessed in its new format. So whilst we have gone through a transition phase, if you like, from the initial days of working right at the beginning of COVID and having to sort that out very quickly, I would say that we have no concerns over the productivity of staff, and actually most staff are reporting working extra hours because they don't have that sort of delinear piece where they actually physically go home. So therefore, actually, we're probably getting more hours now than we used to, and we've certainly got no complaints in terms of our overall performance. So, but obviously we will keep that under review.
Anecdotally, Sue, I've had quite a lot of difficulty, I don't know whether other councillors have, in getting hold of people in planning, for example. In fact, I had a conversation with the head of planning last week when I went up a line and I must have called 8 members of staff. Literally, I started at the bottom and I went up the hierarchy. So just anecdotally, I don't think everything is perfect. There seems to be a problem with the telephone system, and I do find it very difficult to get hold of staff. So that's just my personal experience. So I'm not sure that you should necessarily take it that just because you haven't seen some complaints that everything is perfect.
So I can comment on that, Councillor Cubitt. We've obviously had that, and we've actually investigated some of that, and actually not necessarily the planning one, but other members have come to us and said they've been having difficulty getting hold of members. Unfortunately, just because people are working at home doesn't mean they don't spend 9 to 5 in meetings, and they're not necessarily available to take calls. So sometimes a quick email requesting a call back may be more effective. And so one of the things we're looking at is how to advise members on how to contact staff, because actually, people are, if I take myself, for example, I probably spend 10 hours a day on Teams in meetings, and therefore it's actually very difficult to take a call during that time because you're already working. So we're certainly picking that issue up and hoping to advise members on how to get hold of staff at different times.
I've found that an email to staff asking them to call me back at their convenience seems to work perfectly adequately. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to add to Audley's comment that last week I phoned in to speak to officers and asked for 7 officers across 2 different departments, and no one was available to speak to me. I don't think that is acceptable as a practice. To say 7 officers across 2 departments, that's not good enough. Thank you.
Okay.
No, sorry.
Councillor
Well, firstly, I think there are other members that, but just in addition to that, one of the areas that I've had concerns about pre-COVID, and it's kind of amplified as a result of COVID, is handovers. So when there's a member of staff that is responsible for a specific application, so for example in the private sector, usually if you are a 3-day-a-week employee, you have somebody else that covers for a planning application when you're not on for the 2 days because you're a 3-day-a-week member of staff. And what I have found on a number of cases in planning specifically recently is people are on holiday, or they have been away, or they've been unwell, and there's nobody that seems to be covering for staff during the 5-day week in terms of live cases. And I just wonder whether that system needs to be looked into by audit, that there is handover, that there are 2 members of staff that cover each live planning application, so that we're not completely beholden to 1 member of staff in the event that they are A, on holiday, or B, are working 3 days a week, or C, are on sick leave.
I don't know about you on leave, but when I've had a planning query, if the officer isn't there, there's usually somebody there who's quite happy to look at the file. So I don't find that problem. Councillor Vogt.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, but just following up on the theme of staff working at home. When I read this audit report, it talks about questioning the resilience of reliance on Virgin Media. And I thought, okay, that's fine, but that's if you're at the office. So what happens about business continuity planning, bearing in mind staff are working at home and reliant on their home systems? Have we looked at that and what we would do if a key member of staff system went down at home, and how we would manage that as an organisation?
I think that's definitely one for Sue.
So that's an excellent point. So as part of the smarter ways of working, one of the things they are looking at is business continuity. Obviously, we haven't faced that issue because people seem to be losing drop out of odd meetings. We have a number of dongles that are available if necessary if people's home broadband isn't working. So we do have a business continuity issue in that if a particular imperative member of staff kept dropping out and couldn't work, one, they can come and work in Parklands because obviously the office is open for business need. And secondly, in order to help them work from home whilst that was being resolved, we would provide them with a modem and a dongle in order for them to be able to continue to work. But yes, if there's a business need, they can still come into Parklands to work.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Although if people can travel by car, that's fine. I think if they've got to travel in by public transport, they might have some anxieties about that. So I had a couple of other comments, and one was on the outstanding work that's left there. And I appreciate it's been a very difficult time, and I appreciate with COVID, people have had to divert to other things. And I realise that these things are not the fundamental. They haven't been classified as fundamental, but they have been classified as significant. All of these actions are significant, and that's the second rating down in importance. And if you look at what could happen as a result of them not being completed as a significant rated action, there are material things that have been considered. So it feels to me like we're ploughing ahead with audits and getting some really good stuff out of the audits, but the work is just piling up like a huge heap of stuff that's about to fall on us. So I find that quite hard to accept that it's just rolling on and on and on. And I suppose the bit that worries me even more is that a lot of them have just got a response saying no response or no update. And I think surely the least people can be doing is providing an update to that action plan to say what is happening, or if there is a plan to even deliver it, or something like that. It just feels like we're auditing and piling up work, but not actually able to
Let's
deliver
turn to Paul, who's going to give us an answer
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, what we'll do, because we do chase recommendations each month, and as we're approaching the end of September, in the next round of chase up, we will ask for a position statement for each of those recommendations rather than no response, and that will be reflected in the next progress report to committee.
Yeah, I feel it's building up, and I'm feeling quite uncomfortable about it. I mean, the other one that I felt uncomfortable about, I did mention earlier in the meeting, which is on page 219, I think it is, about the amount of money which has been sitting with Next Action Legal. It says here £304,000, which appears not to be actively monitored. And I appreciate now we're in a COVID situation, it's difficult for us to pick that up. But this has clearly been a problem that was pre-COVID. And I would therefore just like to understand how that figure is handled within our accounts. Is it there as an expectation, i.e. is it a creditor to us, or have we written that off? I mean, how is it being reflected?
Well, it would be a debtor to us, Jenny.
It would be a debtor to us. So, and yet, realistically, if some of that's been sitting there for a number of years.
And there would be a bad debt provision provided. So I think we've probably covered on that. Would you agree, Paul? Yes, got nodding here.
Okay. So it's about getting the processes right, is it? The systems and processes right for that? Yeah.
That's my primary concern, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, do you want to go through the appendices, or can we just note the report? Note the report?
Yeah.
Okay. Which takes us on to item 12, review of the corporate risk register.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. This report presents the committee the current position of the corporate risk register following the latest review by SLT that took place on the 9th of September, and the report takes its usual format. All I wanted to do was bring to attention to the committee paragraph 3.2 on page 232, which details the 2 risk score changes that have been identified through this review. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Tilbury.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, funny enough, that's the point I was going to make. RR10 at 3.2 says poor relationship between political groups impacting on effective governance. Then it goes on to say that all group leaders are now attending group leader meetings, which has led to a greater level of engagement across political groups. The implication of RR10 is that there was a poor relationship between political groups. Where I am aware of the reasons why one of the groups were not attending political group leaders meetings, but it had nothing to do with any issues between any of the political groups. So I'm a bit concerned by that, because that is very misleading, and particularly as it comes from the changes come from the chief executive, who's no longer with us. But I mean, I just don't know where this is coming from. I think there's far more of an issue between poor relationship between political groups and officers, possibly, and and the other, I think, a far greater risk, as we've seen in recent years, is when there are issues between various senior officers. But that's far more of a risk, I think. In any way, a poor relationship between the political groups. I've been on the council for 18 years. There's an ideological issue between the political groups, but I don't think there's ever been a particularly poor relationship at any time. They have an ideological issue, and I've often been stuck in the middle of it. But the relationship between most councillors and certainly the political groups has been quite good. And it wouldn't matter anyway, because if whoever's in charge will do what they want, so it doesn't affect corporate governance. So I'm a bit concerned by the statement in there.
I'll ask probably Sue if she wants to comment on that particular risk.
It's not my risk, Councillor Gardner. It's not appropriate for me to comment on it.
No,
Okay, Paul.
Chair, that's fine. I'm more than happy to take that back to SLT for the next review to look at the wording again and report back as necessary.
Thank you, Paul.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. On that particular risk, RR 10, it is the Chief Executive as the risk owner. It would be very interested to know how he makes that assessment, whether it's his personal assessment or whether he has any discussion with any of the groups about their potential conflicts or whether they're working well, and also whether the extent to which it impacts on governance, because I think it is in that context, isn't it? Does it impact on governance or not? Because it's not clear from this how that judgment is made, and I wasn't entirely sure if it was just the relationships between political groups or the relationship between all political groups and the council, because it's not very clear on that, and so a bit of clarity might not go amiss, and also some understanding of how the assessment is made. But I think that just everybody going to group meetings, group leaders meetings, doesn't mean to say there isn't any conflict or necessary how that might impact on governance.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll take those comments forward.
Okay, I've got one question on paragraph 3.4, where we talk about the council's business continuity plans have been in full flow for several months, despite the fact that we've also got several fundamental recommendations outstanding. Are you happy that those fundamental recommendations can be overcome?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't think they're fundamental. I think they're significant recommendations. And
red was
oh, sorry, apologies. I won't go back to the paper. In terms of answering the question, I think there's the best way to test a business continuity plan is to actually put it in a live environment, and that's what's been put in place over the last several months. So I'm comfortable that business continuity is working, because I think everybody can see that the council is still performing.
Okay, but none of those fundamental recommendations is actually causing a problem?
No.
Splendid. Councillor James.
Yes, Chair, I just wanted to make a cross-party consensus really on that point about relationship between political groups. I mean, there's an element of disagreement between us, and thank God we have that, because otherwise we'd be a lousy democracy. So I think it's very important. Opposition has a role to approach everything from a different angle as the administration, because that's our job, and also the opposition itself will often have different views, and I know often the Conservative Party have different views. For as long as I've been a councillor, there's always been a situation where sometimes all the councillors agree with me and the rest of the time they're wrong, and that's never going to change, I don't think. I think the problem is if there's a trust issue between the senior management team or a member of the senior management team and the groups, and that's what it should have been phrased as, an issue of confidence of that. And obviously that's something we can't afford to have, because we all should have the confidence. If we ask a question of a member of the senior management team or any officer, is the advice is to the best of their ability, and it doesn't matter whether we're a member of the administration or a member of the opposition, we get the same good and robust advice, whether we like it or not. And I think that was the issue, and particularly with the chief executive that's now left us. So I think it does need rewording, because I'd hate people to think that there's a big issue in this council of the groups not getting on. Of course, we don't always get on, but that's the point. We have to fight for what we believe is right, and it's refreshing that it's wrong. If we all thought the same, it'd be a rubbish council.
Well, I don't think the problem is that we disagree. I think it's a matter that we can work together despite those disagreements. And the risk is that there could be a problem if we don't accept other people's opinions or their right to have an opinion.
But that's the point, Chair. We have our disagreements, we have our debates, we have our discussions, and then ultimately, where we can't reach a consensus, we have a vote. And that's the way democracy works.
And we live with a vote. Okay. Anybody want to say anything on? Yes, Anneli?
Yes, it's just to do with this corporate risk table. Where does the very grave, very real concerns that exist and risks that exist in relation to the general state of our commercial real estate portfolio and non-payments and revenue streams. Where does it lie? Does it lie with number 5, or does it lie with number 6, or does it lie with neither? The reason why I asked the question is because I would have thought that somewhere, given we have a £300 million portfolio, I personally, if this was my chart, I would have my commercial real estate sitting in the red box at the moment. And who decided not to?
Thank you, Chair. I'd suggest it's within the finance and budgets, because any impact on the income or the rental, etc., would have an impact on the finances of the council.
Well, I'd be very interested to know why Sue doesn't think that it should be a high risk then, because in view of the macroeconomic environment that we're looking at, in view of all the news in the business section, in view of specifically the impact on retail and commercial real estate, and in view of the bankruptcies coming down the line, etc., I'd be appreciative as to why you could explain why it's not sitting in the red at the moment.
So it's the combination of scores. So we think that it's the likelihood is possible and the impact is critical. So without a shadow of a doubt, if the situation happened, we consider it to be critical, but the combination of the two give it an overall amber warning, because it's obviously part and parcel of the overall accounts for the authority, and the fact that we have significantly risk assessed this area and actually increased the income risk reserve in February in recognition that we felt that there was a significant concern around property income. Obviously, this was completed in August, when we looked like we were actually moving into a period of actually reopening everything. And whilst, yes, you could argue that there should have been a reasonable assumption around a second wave, in terms of the overall position of the council's finances and the impact that property rental has on that at the time, and probably even now, I would still consider that we have sufficient resources and risk reserves in order to mitigate that issue. And obviously the property asset strategy with JLL, looking at all different assets and improving the asset management plan, should put us in a position where actually we are trying to be proactive about managing our assets, not waiting for it to kind of creep up on us and cause a risk. So I'm still comfortable that that is the right risk assessment.
Seems a fair answer. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just on RR10, it is interesting to note all the others seem to be fairly objective, and yet that singular risk assessment entry is incredibly subjective. So is it the matter, obviously Stu says it's the owner, the risk owner that owns this. Is it the matter that the risk owner gets to choose what they put into the risk register and they can choose the wording of it? Therefore it is subjective. Or is it an objective assessment? In which case, where in the hell did that come from? And in the context of where it goes, the context of group leaders having a review of this, perhaps, does it fall back to the risk owner, as in the chief executive, to decide whether or not that stays in or not? I was intrigued with it being incredibly subjective language.
Paul?
Yeah. In terms of how it appeared in the risk register, it has been in there for probably 2-3 years now, and it was a risk that was placed in there by the then chief executive. It is reviewed at SLT, but as I've mentioned previously, I will take forward all the comments that have been made by the committee for the next review of the corporate risk register, which will be February.
Okay, can we note the reports? Noted. Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act Annual Review of Policy. And we need to approve this one, not just note it. Who's presenting?
I am, Chair. Chair. So it's an update. It's an update of the policy, and the key changes are set out in paragraph 2.2. So committee's just asked to approve the revised policy.
Do you think there's anything significant in the changes?
No, Chair, it's mainly an update, things like updating the authorising officers, for instance, because there have been a lot of changes at the top of the organisation, taking into account some of the recommendations from the National Anti-Fraud Network and revising our policy to reflect those, retention issues, those sort of things.
Does anybody want to raise questions, or can we approve the report? I've got Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. It's rather frustrating when you read these things and there's been an amendment, but you're not entirely sure what it was said before the amendment. So it's difficult to know whether it's got worse. And RIP is one of those pieces of legislation that I think if the government introduced everything they wanted to introduce, it never would have got through. So we have this sort of gradual creepage where we just had another bit each time. And I was a bit concerned with the, I think it's in 11.4, material obtained in the course of investigation may be used in connection with investigations other than the one that the relevant authorisation was issued for. However, the use or disclosure of much material outside the council, unless directed by court order, shall only be considered in exceptional circumstances. And that entire section 11, I really wanted to understand how it had changed, because there's an awful lot in there about if you do an investigation, you obtain data for the purposes of investigation, then you decide that investigation has come to an end. It seems to give you a lot more power now to hold on to that data if you believe it may be relevant in a future civil case, criminal case, or another investigation. But it doesn't seem to be very tidy about what the another investigation means. And it seems a little bit like we can data bank now. We can get this data, we can bank it and store it for as long as we can just about justify having it in our data bank forever, if necessary. And that was really quite scary. Obviously, the more data you hold, the more you can potentially leak. And we've got the paper after this one that obviously will reveal the risks of leaking data. But it just seems that the council's powers seem to be growing and growing to hold personal data for as long as it likes, for whatever it likes, and use for whatever it wants. And it's a bit concerning. So I'm not going to say at this point that we shouldn't approve these changes, because I guess they're national kind of direction. But I would feel at some point we really need to not put this at the end of a massive agenda. I think it's really important. This is about people's civil liberties and the creeping power of the state. And I think at some point you have to have a proper look at it and really go through about what powers we need and start justifying why we have them, because ultimately the greatest power should be held by the individual, and the power held by any state should only be those that the individual feels happy for the state to hold. And this seems to be going the other way around. But I say until we could have a sort of 2-hour session on this, we're probably not going to get very far. So at some point it'd be nice if next year we make sure this doesn't collide with something else, so we can have a proper look at it.
Yeah, I could
party political statement from the Liberal Party.
Chair, I could have the data protection officer write to Councillor James, just showing the changes as against the last version, and I will do that.
Sue?
Yeah, so obviously just to point out that the key changes are noted in 2.2, paragraph 2.2 on page 254, and the only change to section 11 is actually to do with the fact that we give some assurances on how we're holding the data. None of the powers have actually changed, but obviously, as Anne said, we can obviously advise you specifically what actually changed. But in that particular section, it's purely related to the fact that we've got to give assurances that we're only holding the data in line with a disposal and retention policy.
I think Councillor James' point was more in terms of what was actually in that section 11 rather than the changes to section 11. So I think that might be worth coming back at a later date. What do you think, Councillor James?
Well, as I say, I've not noticed any great campaign at the moment from the public about this. I've not seen T-shirts for sale. So I think, yeah, in future we should always have the changes clearly outlined, so we see what it did say, now what it does say, to see whether we think the powers or changes are appropriate, going in the right direction. But as I say, I think to take this at the end of a very busy agenda, actually at least once every 3-4 years we should stop, have an entire look at it, and just really have a review of where we are as an authority. Clearly the government give us lots of powers to do stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should accept all those powers if we feel like holding them, or feel that the Basingstoke public and Basingstoke and Dean public deserve a greater level of liberty than the government place on the rest of us. I'm always one to challenge the power of the state, at any kind of state, at any level. And I just think it'd be nice to challenge this at some point with a bit more time to look at it and really go through it in detail.
Well, are you suggesting that we put it as an agenda item for a future meeting?
Well, it appears that the whole RIPA thing, because we've got this agenda item, the next one does come round annually. So I'm guessing at the next annual point is the time to see whether we have a separate meeting where this can be, say, not at the same time as we go through the entire accounts of the council. It's a massive agenda this time, and I just don't think we should dismiss this as a bolt on.
Make a suggestion, Gavin, as you say, it comes around annually, but can we actually review the policy at the meeting prior to the approval of a new update and actually have time to debate it at length?
Yes, that would be right. But I'll leave it to you, Chair, to work out the best way of doing that.
Well, I'll see if to put it on the work programme. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it occurs to me that actually it might sort of, you know, we can put it on the work programme, but it might be more easily sort of kicked off, as it were, by having, should we say, a little bit more detailed explanation of what some of the terms mean, because to me, in my previous employments, things like material obtained during the course of an investigation which might be relevant to that investigation or another investigation would suggest something was ongoing, and similar to pending or future civil or criminal proceedings would sort of tend to indicate there is a prospect of future or criminal proceedings. In other words, that it's being held because something imminent is already known or about to happen, as opposed to, well, we'll keep this for 10 years just in case, which I think would be a very different
Well, I think that's
thing.
a question to ask now, so I'll ask Anne what she thinks about that.
I'm not a data protection officer, so I would struggle to answer that, but I think, again, I'll give you a written answer from Jackie.
Okay. Well, I think, as we said, we put it on the work programme so that we can review it as it stands before we send it for revision.
I do wonder, Chair, whether it might be an item that members might want training on as part of the member induction programme. And then if there are any residual issues, they could be picked up after that.
I think if everything we suggested went into the members induction programme, it would probably take them the first 2 years of their time on the council to assimilate it all. So I think a member induction programme has to be focused. It can't cover everything. Councillor Cubitt.
Thank you. I was just going to say that I agree with everything that Councillor James says. But I know from the frequent visits that we have from the officer concerned, I don't think we abuse our position in the council, and she's very clear when we do what we do, and we don't do it very often, because we said from the very outset that we as a council, I mean, on this committee, said that we didn't want to see the council abuse its powers. So whilst I think your points are well made, I do believe that the data protection officer and team actually are very careful about when and how they use it, and they have to report the returns to us anyways, and it doesn't seem to have been excessive to date.
Agreed. Okay, we approve the report as it is, but we would like to have a look at it again the meeting before we approve the next iteration. Agenda item 13, Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, annual review of, oh, we just done that one. Agenda item 14, viewing of social network sites.
Chair, again, this is a report that comes to you at every meeting.
Yeah, I think I was going to present that one in the absence of Jackie, but basically the only people who've been using it are internal audit as part of their internal audit given COVID. So I don't think we have any problem with that. No. Okay, noted. General Data Protection Regulation, notification of data breaches reported to the ICO. Anne, do you want to take that one?
Thank you, Chair. There's only been one breach to report to the ICO that was considered to be a significant breach, and that related to a SharePoint incident when, although it was created for the team, the defaults operated so that all members of staff and in fact members had access to that information. However, the information wasn't outside the organisation, it remained inside the organisation, and action was taken to reset the permissions, and it was reported to the ICO, who acknowledged, in view of the fact that we'd acted swiftly and the data hadn't gone outside, that there was no need to take any further action. Thank you,
Any
Chair.
questions? Noted. So, agenda item 16. We may or may not have a meeting on the 7th of December, depending on whether we pull it forward. But we want to add to that, dare I say it, a look at the Redmond review, which is coming down the line on the presentation of the annual accounts. So I think a briefing on that would be useful for the next meeting. Anne, did you have a comment on that? Sue, anybody? Oh.
Sorry, just trying to unmute and put my camera on. Yes, so obviously there's a lot of, we've got the opportunity to be involved in a number of discussions on the findings of the report, and therefore we felt that probably the next committee would be appropriate because we'll have a lot of that feedback in order to be able to inform the committee and to give an overall summary of the position.
Thank you. Ellie, have you picked up the additional items for the future?
Yes, that's noted.
That's a yes, is it?
Noted, yeah.
Okay, so can you issue a new work programme to the members of the committee as soon as possible?
Yep, I'll do that for you.
Okay, I declare the meeting closed at 8:55. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Good night.
Chair.